Good afternoon. Welcome to NextRev's weekly Power Hour session. Today's Power Hour will be focused on creating instruction manuals with Creo Illustrate. I will be your host today. My name is Alberto Masaroto, and I'm one of the application engineers here at NextRev. It looks like we've got quite a few people on the call today. And just so you know that when we start the webcast, everybody does default to mute. If there are any questions in the GoToMeeting panel on the right side of your display, you'll see a chat area. Feel free and type anything in there. I will be checking it periodically. Just above chat, you'll see an area that says questions. You may ask any questions in there. I will pause periodically to, number one, see if there are any questions or any issues. For example, if your audio or video has stopped working, please type that in the chat area, and I will ensure that I get to that. Anyway, moving on. So just real quickly, our agenda. We'll talk briefly about who NextRev is, what we do. We'll talk about some of our power hours that we've had in the past as well as upcoming ones, and moving on to our instructor-led courses. Finally, we'll get into discussion about what does it take to create a manual and dive into Creo Illustrate. From there, we'll go to our demonstration. And then finally, there will be a little bit of a Q&A time. So NextRev, we have been working with PTC since 2001. We handle the entire western coast of the United States. And between all of our engineers here, we've got well over 50 years of combined technical expertise with PTC tools, as well as training and consulting. We've got well over 1,000 customers that we work with on a regular basis. And the coverage and support that we have due to the number of engineers that we have in this small area is second to none. We're also the #1 Windchill reseller in the Western region. If you don't know what Windchill is, let me know. We can also discuss that offline. From here, so we are currently ending our current series of power hours. Our last one for this series is next week, exchanging board design and ideas with Creo. We do have a number of power hours that will be coming up shortly after, so please stay tuned to our new session of power hours. We are currently in the process of uploading our old ones, so all of those will be available to you as well. So our instructor-led courses, we do teach everything in the PTC ecosystem. We are also one of the few companies in the United States that actually does teach Creo Elements Direct and Creo Direct. That's formerly Co-Create. So if anybody out there is interested in Creo Elements Direct or Co-Create, or even the new Creo Direct, please let us know. I also would like to tell you that we are very, very close to the San Jose Airport as well as the San Francisco Airport. We are also located in sunny Northern California. So those of you in beautiful Detroit, in mid-January, yes, we are going to be offering training classes at that time also. So by all means, make the sacrifice and come out to visit the Golden Gate. Do our training class during that week. I think you'll find it both educational as well as maybe getting you out of that snow might be beneficial as well. Moving on to actually talking about work. So manuals. Oftentimes, companies have dedicated people that create these manuals. And sometimes it's the job of the engineer to create these manuals. So assuming that we do have somebody internally that does create these manuals, we're going to talk to the engineers and say, look, we need to get some PDFs of certain parts and assemblies and certain orientations, and you're going to spend quite a bit of time working with these graphic designers. So we're going to export these PDFs and work with additional tools. Sometimes, Illustrator, maybe InDesign, to create these static images. The problem is, as engineers, we don't always complete a project as much as we'd like to and make it perfect the first time. I do, but that's a whole other discussion there. As you can see, my head is quite large right now. But nevertheless, we have to go back and make these updates. And well, what happens if we are going to be using these disjointed products? Well, we're going to have to recreate everything. This is very, very labor intensive. And on top of that, if the graphic designer and the engineers are disjointed, we're not going to know if these things have been updated. How often have you received a manual for something to build and the images in the manual don't reflect the images that you're, or I'm sorry, don't reflect the parts that you're working with? I mean, as engineers, we never open the manual anyway, but that's a whole other problem. Moving on, with Creo Illustrate, we don't have this disjointed process any longer. What we have are direct access to native Creo files. Okay. This way, we don't have to waste the engineer's time by saying, look, you know, we need an image in this orientation, save it as a PDF, email it. No. The people, the graphic designers using Creo Illustrate simply open the native files, select their pieces, create their explode views, their cross sections, their manuals, all on the fly. As the changes throughout the course of the design process occur, it will be dynamically updated. We also have a graphic library, so pliers, screwdrivers, a hand, warning signs, these are all available to you. And on top of that, animations. How many of you that have been using Pro E for many years have always wanted to have some sort of an animation tool that will show movement, save it as an AVI, or show an explode, save it as an AVI? Now we have a tool that will show all of that and save it as an MPEG or an AVI, and you post it on your website. This is what we'll be working with here. Now onto the demonstration. Now before I get started, I do want to make sure that everybody actually is working, does actually get all of my audio and my video. In the chat area, I see that it is blank, so it appears that everything is working. So let's, at this point here, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I'm just basically going to open up Creo Illustrate. Now, for those of you who maybe are new to the Creo family of tools, you'll notice that the interface is a bit different maybe than Wildfire 5 or Wildfire 4 that you've seen in the past. This is the Microsoft Ribbon user interface. It's not just kind of looking like it is actually licensed from Microsoft. So that said, you know, as we kind of pan through it here, you'll notice that we really don't have any drop-down windows. We don't have areas where things get lost. Everything is out and visible to us. All right. So step one, I have to bring in a model. Now I can bring in a Pro E file. I can bring in a product view file, or I can bring in a file that I've saved with Creo Illustrate. And the Creo Illustrate file extension is C3DI. So the Creo 3D Illustrate basically is what it means. I'm going to open up this part here, or this assembly, and as you can see, we don't see anything. We need to actually reference objects in the assembly in order to see them. And the reason for that is, let's say we have a car, and we simply want to focus on the suspension. In fact, that's what we'll be doing today. I'm only going to bring in kind of a light representation of the car, focus on that suspension piece, rip it out of the car, and just put it into my illustration mode. So let's go ahead and do that. We have our Tools tab here, and we want to edit the structure of what we were working with here. So I'm going to click on that, and we're going to have the structure, our electronic bomb here, that's going to come up. And if I, in order to see it, we have to actually turn on visibility and view our E-bomb here. So this is what we have. The light blue color simply denotes that it's there, it's visible, but we really haven't brought in the top level representation yet. So what I want to do, and just for a moment before I get started, I'll talk a little bit about some of the controls. It's a bit different if you are used to Creo Parametric. Center click will still move things around, but we do have a bit more of a loosely defined orientation. We don't have, although we can turn on the origin, by default it's simply going to keep the mouse cursor in an area where we maybe have a little bit more flexibility. Also, the right click gives us the little navigator here, so if I scroll up, it'll zoom in. If I scroll down, roll the mouse down, it'll zoom out, and to the left and to the right will pan. Okay, and of course, Shift, center click, still can do the same thing. So there's really, you know, kind of minimal differences here. So let's spin this guy back around, and now we're going to take this top level assembly here that I want to work with and drag it to the left into my illustration area. So left click and hold and just drag it in here. Okay. So now what's happened is I brought in the entire front left suspension assembly. We can also disable color view code to actually, color code view to actually show us the entire assembly structure in its native colors. Now the thing is, oftentimes during an illustration, we're not going to want to look at all of this at once. And on top of that, maybe we have parts that are serviceable, maybe we have parts that we buy elsewhere that we don't really need to know how to service, so we can have some breakdowns in here. So what I want to focus on for a moment is I want to select this assembly here, and notice that under the home icon we have an insert area here. So I'm going to click on insert, and let's create a new grouping of parts, and I'm going to call this serviceable. Sorry, it's not possible for me to type and talk. Just like I've learned that I can't talk and walk. And naturally did that there. It starts again. Serviceable. Okay. All right. So what we've done here is we've created a new folder called serviceable. And I actually want to pause for a moment. I just got a notification here that we're having some technical difficulty. Let me just hang on a moment here. Okay, it looks like we have regained network connectivity. All right, again, so I do apologize for that. If anything like that happens again, please let me know, and we'll definitely pause. I don't want to leave anybody behind here. All right. Because we have serviceable items, we also have items that are not serviceable. So let's do the same thing. We'll select illustration and insert non-serviceable. All right. Okay, so we have serviceable goods and non-serviceable goods here. So we actually need to place items in here. So let's go back to our electronic bomb, and let's kind of mosey around in here and see what we want. So number one, the shock absorber. We buy that from a manufacturer. That's not something that we're going to ask our customers or our technicians to rebuild the Koni shock absorber. So I'm going to just left-click and select that and drag it into non-serviceable. Okay. Next, we want to actually work on the brake rotor and the caliper. So let's go ahead and select the rotor, and the caliper. And I'm going to left-click and drag those into serviceable. So now if I click on serviceable, you can see that the caliper and the rotor highlight, and non-serviceable, the shock absorber assembly will highlight there. Okay. So now I've completed modification here of my structure. And I'm now going to go ahead and close this edit mode. Okay. So if we look here in the illustration view, we can see all the different parts, subassemblies that exist there. So what I can do now is, instead of simply having to come here and kind of close all of them one by one, I can simply go under SBOM right here and ask it to collapse all. Just make life a little bit quicker there. I can also select serviceable, for example, and isolate it so we can see all the items that we do have serviceable. And if we don't want to see all of them, we can simply go to unhide, and it will show everything there. So once our basic structure is set up, let's move forward. Let's do a cross-section. So what I want to do is click under our figures. So initially we have a single figure here, and that's this basically baseline that we've created of this suspension assembly. So I'm going to right-click on it and go to duplicate. And let's go ahead and rename that. And I apologize, the graphics are acting a little funny. GoToMeeting sometimes does that. And we're going to call this cross-section. All right. So we've created a cross-section view, and this is going to be independent of the view above it. So my cross-section view is going to, now I'll just kind of focus on the sectioning tab. If I show a section, okay, by default it will just pick a plane to simply cut the section about. But next to it, initial section, we can basically ask it to go to maybe the y-axis, the z-axis, or the x-axis. And I think I want to focus on the x-axis. To move it back and forth, we have to first select the plane and use the 3D dragger to move it back and forth. Now it is facing the wrong direction for me, so I'll just right-click and simply flip direction. And this is a little better. I want to see it on this side here. The problem is I want to focus in this hub area, and I really could care less about the shock. So I'm going to do a quarter cut. And you can see that it has simply allowed me to do a partial cross-section. Now that's pretty sweet. I don't know. I just think that's one of the coolest things to actually see this dynamic cross-section. I can zoom in. My depth of zoom also will be saved in this particular view. So I think that looks pretty good. And just as a side note, if you just right-click in space, you can actually see render mode. And there are quite a few. And I apologize what the graphics are doing here. There's quite a few types of rendering that are not available in Pro Engineer. Number one, I often see this kind of shaded illustration here, which you'll see in a manual. So it exaggerates the colors, kind of makes them a little bit of a pastel, and does darken the edge lines. Beyond that, I mean, oftentimes you don't even see color, so we are going to have a simple black and white. So this is right here half of what the graphic designer is going to spend their day doing in maybe Adobe Illustrator. I will continue working kind of in this shaded with edges mode here. The problem, of course, because we created this cross-section, is let me just kind of zoom in here. We're going to see that we can see into the parts, okay? And, you know, I really don't need to see inside the part. Obviously, that's not going to help with my cross-section. So we have, let me zoom out a bit here. We have this cap section tool. So kind of just focus on this area here in the caliper. If I cap the section, it just closes it off. Okay, so now it looks like the solid model that it actually is. And also, when we create a cross-section, we really don't care about the planes that are doing the cross-section, so we can simply disable show boundaries, and now we will no longer see the cross-section. I'm sorry, the cross-section planes. Now the beauty is, once I've done this, that's it. This is our cross-section view. And of course, we can do an explode on this, and I want to pause on that because I'm going to jump into explodes just next. So this is a very simple way to create a cross-section. Next, let's go back to our initial figure, and you can see as I go back from our initial figure to our cross-section that they are changing. So we'll go to our initial figure. I'm going to duplicate this as well, and I'm going to call this explode. Those of you using Creo Parametric 1 or 2 will see some similarities here. Those of you who are on a bit of an older version, maybe Wildfire 5, Wildfire 4, there's a lot of differences here, but it's very, very intuitive. So for our explode view, let's just say, for example, that we want to drag this out. Under Home, we have translation mode. I can just select the part, drag it outward. I can go ahead and rotate it. Okay, I don't know if that's really valuable for this particular extrude, but just note that rotation and translation are readily accessible right here. And of course, if we messed up and we didn't want to do that, we can simply restore the location and put it right back. Now there's quite a few things going on here. Maybe you don't want to see an explode of everything. So we want to isolate this brake caliper. So it's very simple. We can just go back under our serviceable area here and simply select the brake caliper, right-click, and again, I apologize for this, and go to Isolate Selective. So now we'll focus on this brake caliper. So number one, we want to show that maybe this clip has to be removed, has to actually slide outward. So let's just drag it out here. And we can also add an explode line by simply selecting the object that we dragged, and it'll create the explode, the explode line. Same with that, we'll just translate this outward, like so. Maybe move these brake pads, drag these outward here, and so on. If I no longer want to isolate everything here, I can always unhide it all, bring everything back, and kind of continue working here. So let's say I want to move all these screws here out of the way. And note, as I select the screw, it's automatically going to select it here in the section tree, the model. I'm sorry, the illustration tree, familiar to an existing Pro E user as the model tree. So I'm going to select everything here that ends in 4, because I know these are all the same piece. Let's drag these outward there, kind of eyeball it, add our explode lines, and here are our screws. We'll take this plate here, also drag it outward. Okay. Now, mind you, I don't know if you noticed this, but as I select an object and drag it out, we are going to get a value indicator that's showing us how far we actually want to drag it out. That is editable, of course. This way, if you have 10 things to drag out, you can say, okay, I can set them all maybe 50 millimeters apart, for example. So what we've done here is we've very, very easily created an explode view. And as before, we have a separate explode view image or a state saved here under my figure tree here. So again, let's go back to our first one, and I'm going to pause for a moment, make sure that graphically everything's working fine. There's no questions, everything looks good. And let's move forward. So we talked about, just to recap here, we talked about just creating the basic structure. We talked about our cross-section, we talked about explode views, but let's get into the fun stuff. Now let's talk about sequences. During an assembly, you don't normally take everything apart at once. We have a specific order to do things. So we're going to right-click on this, and we're going to duplicate that again and rename this view to sequence. Okay. So as you can see here, we have a sequence tab here on the top. What we're going to do is now add some steps. Now, in order to see the sequences, we actually have to open up our lower data panel here, which in this leftmost tab will show us all of our sequences. This is our step editor. We're going to see this in both sequences as well as animations. Now, I want to note that an animation and a sequence are very different. An animation is a recorded series of events. A sequence will record both zoom depth as well as have a little dialog box that might tell you exactly what step you're working on. So let's add a new step. You can see in the top left that automatically step 1 appears. Let's go ahead and give it a description. We're going to call this remove clip. Hit enter and it will update there, remove clip. So step 1, what I want to do is zoom in here and look at this clip. Here on the left, top right, you see the red dot. That is basically saying that we're recording. I can shut off record by simply clicking on record content. That'll shut it off. I'll turn record back on. I'm going to select this clip. I'm going to translate it outward, and I'm also going to ask it to fade out. I don't want to see it once I've moved it. Next, I'm going to select this clip here. Oh, before I do that, actually, we have to add a new step. Select the clip, drag this outward, and again, I'll just ask it to fade out. The next step, and you'll notice that step 1 is remove clip. Step 2 is, we'll call this maybe remove pin. Step 3, we can say remove pads. So let's zoom in to the brake pads here. Select pad 1, press Control, select pad 2, drag it outward, and maybe we can just let it be. So at this point here, let's go ahead and stop that and actually figure out how this looks. We have to rewind, of course, rewind the whole animation. Make sure you deselect everything. I'll drop the pane out of the way. And you see that the panes can be visible here at the bottom left of the display. If you're familiar with Creo, that's where your model tree visibility and your web browser visibility are. So this is the bottom panel, this is the EBOM panel, and this is the SBOM panel. And if we want to get rid of all of them, we can simply click on this window here, and that will get rid of everything. So we can see just what we're working on. So simply by hitting play, we can see that the clip came out, the pin came out, and the brake pads came out. The first 2 came out, of course, because came out and faded away because I asked them to do that. I can bring it back, of course, by clicking on this tab, and we'll be back in our old area. Now, I can also kind of go back and say, you know what? Before this pin goes away, before this clip goes away, we might want to tell the user, be careful and don't drop it. You know, I've dropped plenty of things into oblivion many times. So we'll put a little warning sign there. We'll just place it here. And let's add an annotation and say a note. I can say, do not drop. There we go. Okay. So now as we go through our animation process, we'll have this appear. Initially, we take the clip out, and then it'll go away in step 2. Okay, so just some annotations here as we're building all of our steps. Now this, although it did show us an animation, is not necessarily the animation tool. So what I want to do now is actually create an animation. So again, figure 1, I'll click back on that. Here's our cross section, our explode, and our sequence. And notice at the top of the sequence display here on the left, you'll see that it has a series of kind of like a zipper looking thing. That's simply a series of images that are tied to each other. That's what it's denoting. So we'll click back on figure 1, right click, duplicate, and again, I'm going to rename this animation. I do want to caution you with one thing on the animation. There are so many cool little features that you'll probably spend too much time doing this because it's a ball. It is so much fun to actually make these things kind of shake as they come out, change color, rotate, add screwdrivers. So it is a lot of fun to do this. So just remember, we still need to design things at the end of the day. So don't get too caught up in it, because I certainly did. So animation. Here, we click on the Animation tab and click on Advanced. All right, now we're going to start to have some fun. So step 1, you already noticed that it is going to default to record content and turned on, hence the red dot to the left, to the right. So let's begin with selecting the clip, okay? And we are going to say Effects and make it pulse. Maybe that'll just make it a little more noticeable. And then we are going to have it translate outward. And of course, since we don't want it anymore once it's moved away, we're going to ask it to fade out. Next, we'll do the same thing with this clip here. Simply hit Translation, so by default, drag it outward, and Effects, ask it to fade out. Note that as I'm creating different features here, it's basically adding 1-second increments. These, of course, can all be edited. You can make them longer, make them shorter, whatever you need to do. You also overlay different sequences. So next, I actually want to bring in a tool. Let's go to Home and Symbols and drag in a screwdriver. So let's kind of place a screwdriver here. And before I do that, actually, let me go undo that for a moment, because I want to press pause. I don't want to actually record bringing in the screwdriver. I want to place it and then resume work. So Symbols, screwdriver, plop that in space, and go back to Animation and select Translation mode. So let's kind of bring it in here, get it close to one of these tools. You can see it's, again, because we're in a 3D tool, it's going to place it maybe not in the right plane and space. So it might take a couple of attempts to get it right in the right spot. And this looks like it's done it pretty well. And please forgive me. I'm well aware that I'm using a flat blade screwdriver on a Allen head. I know that we're not supposed to do that, but bear with me. Okay, so there's my screwdriver. So now let's record content. I'm going to select the screwdriver and say, you know what, I want you to fly in, I think it's going to be in the plus Z direction. So Z is the blue axis. And so we want it to fly in from the plus side. So we'll do the plus Z. Okay, so that added a ½ a second. Once it flies in, I really don't need it anymore. So we'll simply go to Effects and Fade Out. I will then select all 4 of these bolts here. We're going to go to Effects and maybe make them Make them shake. That sounds like fun. Ooh, you know what actually we'll do? We'll undo that. I got a better one. We'll select these 4 bolts here, and we are going to make them unscrew themselves. So cabs here, effects, and we'll do unscrew. Give it the default, okay. And now they will back themselves out. And of course, once they're out, don't need them anymore. So we will simply ask them to fade out. All right. At which point, we'll select the entire caliper. And we can, of course, do that from our serviceable items area. So we'll select the caliper. I'll pause on this for a moment. Where's our caliper? Here is our caliper. There. Sorry, John, just bear with me. The graphics, because of this, are GoToWebinar kind of acting funny here. All right. Okay, so here's our caliper, and we are now going to resume our record content. I am going to translate this outward and ask it to also fade out. So that leaves us with this part here. Now what I want to do is say, okay, I want to get this hub out. Oops, that's not the whole hub. I want just the hub. I want to get this hub out. So we're going to ask it to shake and then say, okay, we need to remove this in order to get the hub out. So we'll go back to effects and ask it to pulse. We will drag this outward and then ask it to go away, at which point this feature, oh, and then we'll do first, I guess we'll select all these bolts first, actually. So we'll select these 4 bolts. Use the model tree for this. Ask them to unscrew. Okay. And then we translate out, effects, fade out, and lastly, we can say, okay, now that's free to move. Let's have it change color. We'll make it change to pink. That's all set there. We've commenced recording, so we can just shut off record. Simply go back to the beginning of this. Obviously, it's going to go backwards here. Kind of see the reassembly of the feature. Everything's going to start to kind of fly in, fly out. Okay. Once that's actually happened, let's hit play and watch what is going on. Okay. That's unscrewed. Caliper moves. Kind of get the idea of what's going on. Again, this was kind of quick. I do see a couple of things I may have to go back and change, but the beauty is I can go back there, edit their definition, change them very quickly, and make my new video. Mind you, I did what I said not to do. I kind of went crazy with it because it is a lot of fun to work with. So this, of course, can be saved as if we export it here. We can save it as a variety of things. All right. So in this case here, we can save it as a Windows Media Viewer document, an MPG, really whatever we want to. So this is a great way to export it and send it to somebody, or export it and put it on your website. All right. With that, I would like to end this part of the demonstration and kind of recap what we talked about. Okay. So initially we talked about how to group things. So in this case here, we started off with our suspension, created a serviceable area and a non-serviceable area. Again, I just did that because I know that there are some pieces here that maybe my company has created and can tell you how to fix, and other pieces here that you have to just buy. We talked about all the different types of visibility. The colors can change, the edges can change, we can go from black and white to color, and so on. The dynamic cross-sectioning ability. Now, of course, we did save a variety of different images, or of view states, if you're familiar with Pro Engineer, of all these different types of tools. Now, obviously, we did a planar cross-section and a quarter cross-section. And note in the image above that we are able to actually look into the cross-section. And on the image on the bottom right, we actually have capped the cross-section. Bringing in tools. I brought in the screwdriver earlier, which allowed us to actually kind of give a better representation of how to actually unscrew something or what tool to use to unscrew something. We also talked about placement of those pieces. We did an explode, and with obviously every explode, some cases that you do actually want to use some explode lines. So an image of our explode here. When it came to the animation, remember we had the sequences and we had the animations. A sequence is going to show you step 1 through step 50, just like you'd see in any kind of service manual, whereas the animation will give us an actual video representation of how to unscrew something, rebuild something, the tools you'd use, and so on. And just remember that under the Home tab, that's typically where you're going to start with, and for every time you do your exploded views, that's where you're going to find your translation, rotation, restore location, some of your annotations, and under the insert group is where I found all of my symbols. With that, that will complete our demonstration today. I do hope you enjoyed today's demonstration on Creo Illustrate. I will open up the floor at this point here for some questions. So again, in the questions dialog box, I see we have a couple here. Let me just expand this so I can see it. Okay. I have a question from Roberto. Oh, no, I'm sorry, this is Robert. Sorry, there's a Roberto here. How do you change the order of the steps in animations? All you do basically is drag them. Let me show you real quick here. Again, everything is going to be visible here from the Figures tab. So under Sequence here, we simply would, and again, I apologize for the resolution here. It's not the greatest because of this webcast. Basically, we just take step 1 and drag it backward to step 2, and that would change the sequence. It would also change the step number, but it would not change, obviously, the remove pads area. That would have to be updated automatically. Oh, I'm sorry. This was in animations. I apologize. I apologize. In the animation, you just have to go back to that sequence. So let's say you want to move back to this area here on step 5. At this point here, just select that animation and either edit it, select the property, maybe undo it, edit properties. You can kind of see what's going on here, or simply delete it and add it somewhere else. It's a very good question. Additional questions. Again, there is a questions area in the GoToMeeting dialog box. Okay, I've got a question about, excuse me, I have a question about drawing types. So for example, I did bring in a Creo Illustrate file. However, if I had simply a product view file, which as we all know, a product view file is going to show us what everything looks like, but you're not going to get the parametrics behind it. It doesn't matter even if you bring in a step file. We are simply going to be working with a series of parts and subassemblies, and we can reorder them in the event that we are working with maybe a step file assembly on the fly here. So it doesn't matter what file that we have to bring in, we are able to work with it. And it looks like that is the last question we had. All right, well, oh, wait, is it? Okay, this is Robert again. Yes, absolutely. As I showed earlier, I did the assembly and the reassembly. I'm sorry, the disassembly and the reassembly, and you can save that in both directions. So yes, absolutely. You can also kind of mirror it. So if you have one video, again, I would show, but instead of time, it takes maybe a couple of minutes. We can complete the disassembly, mirror the disassembly so that we have the assembly, and then edit that portion of the reassembly to make it a little bit more in the right order. So yes, absolutely, Robert. All right, it looks like that is just about it. Again, I do want to thank you for joining us for this week's Creo Illustrate webcast. Again, my name is Alberto Maceroto. My contact information can be seen here. So if there are any additional questions, by all means, shoot me an email, and we'll go from there. Thank you very much. Have a good end of the day, and have a safe weekend.